Welcome to 24 Hours of Past, 20 Years of Past Learnings and Future Vision. We're very excited that you could join us for a Reza Rad session, Power BI for Enterprises, Robust, Reliable, and Scalable Solutions. This 24 hop consists of 24 consecutive live webinars delivered by expert speakers from the past community. This session will be recorded and posted online after the event. You'll receive an email letting you know when the session is available. My name is Jazjeet, and I work with Pass HQ. I have a few introductory slides before I hand the reins over to Reza. If you require any technical assistance, please type your request into the question pane located on the right side of your screen, and someone will assist you. This question pane is also where you may ask questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to enter your questions at any time, and once we get to the Q&A portion of the session, I'll read your questions aloud to Reza. You're also able to zoom in on the presentation content by using the zoom button located on the top of the presentation window. Please note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session, which will pop up after the webinar ends in your web browser. Your feedback is really important for us for future events, so please take the moment to complete this. I'd like to take a moment now to thank our sponsors, Microsoft and Intel. The staging of 24 Hours of Past wouldn't be possible without their generous support, and they are the reason this event is available free of charge. If you'd like to learn more about Microsoft or Intel and sign up for information on how they can help you, please visit the sponsors page on the 24HOP website. Keep learning all year long with PASS. Visit pass.org and check out all the free educational resources available to PASS members. Also, don't forget that PASS Summit 2019 will be happening on November 5th in Seattle, Washington. So you can head over to passsummit.com and register today. This 24-hop session is presented by Reza Rad. Reza is a Microsoft Regional Director, Trainer, Speaker, Consultant, and MVP since 2011. He's also the author of Power BI, From Rookie to Rockstar, and other books. Reza is also an active blogger and co-founder of Radicad and co-founder and co-organizer of the Definity Conference in New Zealand. And without further ado, here is Reza with Power BI for Enterprises, Robust, Reliable, and Scalable Solutions. Reza.
Hey, great. Thank you, Jazz. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So I won't do any more introduction myself. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, everyone, wherever you are. I'm not right now based in Oakland. I'm presenting you from Germany. Agenda of things that we are going to talk about today are these items. Power BI features for enterprises are quite a lot if you want to talk about all of them. So I picked like 5 of those to talk about, which is Dataflow, composite model, ability to combine models, import data and direct query, aggregations to speed up your models on big data sources, and incremental load to make sure that you do data load instead of reloading data every time, and XMLA endpoint and how that can be helpful in the enterprise solutions, right? And we will have some demos. If you have any questions, feel free to put your questions in the question box at Jazz mentioned. We'll go through that a little bit later after this session. So let's start with Dataflow. Talking about Power BI features for enterprise, it's important to get some of the functionalities of an enterprise BI system in it. And one of the functionalities of an enterprise BI system is ability to run an ETL scenario. Dataflow is actually responsible for that part. So what is Dataflow? Dataflow is a Power Query process that runs in cloud independent from Power BI reports. And that independent part of it is important because that means that the data is not loaded into Power BI dataset or is not loaded into Power BI reports. Data is loaded somewhere else, which is what I'm going to talk about in a second. that Power Query process is not just a normal Power BI file. It's not a PBIX file that you publish to the Power BI website. It's a totally different process. It's a Power Query, let's say, script running in Power BI website, independent from Power BI reports, and because it has to store the output somewhere, the output of Power Query in cloud, or what we call it, Dataflow, is stored in Azure Data Lake, which is like a storage structure for unstructured data, for structured data. In the case of Azure Data Lake, in the case of Dataflow, the storage would be CSV files in Azure Data Lake. So data will be stored as CSV files. And there is a specific folder structure for that CSV file. Every entity will have a folder under that folder. We will have CSV files. So far that process runs in the cloud. Result of that stores in an Azure Data Lake. But then let's say, what if you don't have a Azure Data Lake subscription? What about that process? Because when it comes to Azure Data Lake, you may think that, okay, I don't have the subscription for Azure, how I'm going to use it. The thing is that you get Azure Data Lake as part of your Power BI account. So even with Power BI Pro account, you still can use Dataflow. You will have 10 GB of space in Power BI website anyway. So that data lake storage can be part of your 10 GB space, right? It's called like an internal data lake storage as part of the Dataflow. However, if you have your own subscription of Azure Data Lake storage separately, you can connect that to Dataflow. It's called external data flows. And then you can structure exactly how you want data to be stored. But it's not mandatory to have your own separate subscription. You can just use the normal Power BI Pro account. It will have Azure Data Lake subscription. And of course, premium as well. So what is the point? After creating this, after running that ETL process, storing data into Azure Data Lake, you can use a Power BI desktop to get data from that Azure Data Lake storage, which was the output of Dataflow. So using the item which is getting data from Dataflow. Dataflow that I'm talking about right now is actually became generally available, I think, a couple of days ago. So this option is not beta anymore. It's right now generally available, and you can use it. Now, that was the definition of Dataflow. Now, what is the benefit of Dataflow, especially talking about enterprise implementation of Power BI? What is the benefit of Dataflow? So some benefits, this is one of those, for example. If you have multiple data marts, multiple BI solutions, and you are using one table shared between those. Date table, for example, is a good example for that, right? This is like sales, PBIX file, including sales files, sales tables. And this is inventory, PBIX files, including inventory tables. And they both use date table in it. You might have many other, let's say, models as well, and they might share some of these dimensions. Like you might have customer in this sales data mart. You might have customer in another data mart as well, right? One of the problems of implementing such a solution right now is that if you are doing your ETL through Power Query, then you have to do that process in each file separately. So that means that your code is in different places. Maintaining that code is hard because if you make a change, you have to go in every place and change it. But using Dataflow, you can have a Dataflow that run that shared dimension, let's say date dimension, for example. It runs that on a scheduled basis, and then it loads it into Azure Data Lake storage as part of a Dataflow, and your Power BI files read it from there. So this way, I have my ETL code in one central place for that shared dimension. Whenever I want to change it, I go to that Dataflow and change it instead of copying it across all different PBIX files and maintaining it hard. This way, it's reusable, easy to maintain ETL process. Another example of that is that I have a table. I have a set of tables, and I want to schedule them to refresh on a different schedule. Let's say one of them I want to refresh every day, one of them I want to refresh every week, one of them I want to refresh every 4 hours. Right now, if we have all of these in one PBIX file, we cannot do that. We just have one refresh option for that PBIX file in the website. But if you create one data flow for each of these, then you can set each of these to be scheduled on a different schedule. You can refresh those that are more, let's say, those that you get more often data in it, like your transactional tables. You can refresh it every 4 hours. Those that are not changing that much, you can refresh it every week. So you can have different schedule of refresh. Dataflow will give you better ETL experience. In fact, you can build a centralized data warehouse using Dataflow. A lot of organizations right now using, let's say, SQL Server and SSIS integration, loading data into SQL Server, but many clients might not have that implementation. In that case, they can use Dataflow. Works like an ETL, loads data into Azure Data Lake storage. So you are actually building your Azure Data Lake storage like your data warehouse, and then Power BI use that as a source and read data from there. There are many other scenarios. Another example is that you can do versioning of the data source, like you can store the data at the end of each year, like at the end of 2018, at the end of 2017. This was how my data looked like. Many other scenarios. This was just like few scenarios of what data flow looks like. Right now, let me show you an example of a data flow. So first of all, to use a data flow, you have to be in an organizational workspace. So here I have a Power BI workspace, which I go to. Let me create one workspace. So I'll create an app workspace, and I create a version 2 of app workspace. Let me call it PAS 24 HP sample. So this is my workspace. Which I don't have anything in this workspace at the moment. Now, in this workspace, we have a section which is for data flow. Let me also enable my zooming, which is for data flow. I don't have any data flows at the moment, but I can data flows. And in each workspace, you can have different data flows. So I'll go to one of those that I already have to show you that I have some data flows already in it. So this is one of the other workspaces. I have already some data flows in it. I can go and open one of these data flows. It actually shows me tables that I'm loading in that data flow. And I can start building, let's say, ETL process like that. Now, let's say I want to create one data flow in the workspace that I just created, which was past 24 hours. Yep. Okay. So to create a data flow, I just go here, create data flow, and I want to start with creating new entities. There are lots of details about how to build data flows. We won't have time to go through all of those. I'll just go through it quickly. Here I have different sources that I can select data, that I can select them as a source. And when I choose them, then I can start building my solution based on that. I can read data from Excel. I can read data from SQL Server. I can read data even from other data flows. Or I can even start with a blank query and build my query based on that. All of these options are just possible options. Now, as an example, what I'm going to show you is I have a date table here in Power BI Desktop, which I think I'm going to use this date table in multiple places, in multiple data marts. So what I'll do is I'll go, so this is my date table. I'll go to Advanced Editor. I'll copy this script for that date table. If you worked with Power Query, you know that script in Power Query is doing everything. So I'll come here in my data flow. I'll start with a blank query. And I delete this query here. I paste the query that I copied over there. Click here, and that brings all of that transformations here, and my date table is now ready here, right? Exactly as it was in Power BI Desktop. At the top section here, you see that I have all options of doing data transformations that I want. It's not exactly all of those graphical interface options that I have in Power Query, because here I have more. but more options will come in Dataflow anyway, right? I can also do some AI insights out of it, which we are not going to talk about that part. So let's say this is my table. I'm going to call it date table. And then I click on done. Each Dataflow can also contain more than one, let's say, table, but this one, let's say we'll keep it as one single table. I click on OK, I save the Dataflow. So Dataflow can have multiple tables. We call it entities. I save the Dataflow. Let's call it generic Dataflow. I can schedule it to refresh on a scheduled basis if I want, but for now I just refresh it manually. So I click on refresh. It's a date table. It shouldn't take that much time to refresh. If you are using a Dataflow on top of a data source which is like a on-premises data source, then you have to set up gateway and things like that. So this is already refreshed. You see the last refresh time. That means my date table is refreshed. Now in Power BI desktop file, let me close this one. In a new Power BI desktop file, I can use that as a source, and I can use this date table in any Power BI models that I have. It's not just one Power BI model that I will use it. I will use it everywhere because this is already loaded, stored in Azure Data Lake as a storage, like a centralized data warehouse. So I'll connect to that and I will start analyzing that data. I already have two other Power BI desktop windows open, so it takes a little bit of time for this new one to come up. Yeah, here it is. Now, when I start here, I can start with getting data from Power BI data flows. This option will give me the ability to go to that data flow and read data from there. I need to log in, of course, because my account should have access to that workspace. That data flow exists in that workspace. And then after logging in, I will see a list of all data flows and workspaces that have these data flows. In this case, it was, I'm using a different account, I think. Okay, so let me switch to that correct account for doing that. Yeah, it should be correct account, I think. So one more time. So Power BI data flows. Okay, I think the challenge is that my Power BI data flows setting is connected to my other Power BI account. So I'll go and fix it in a second. Okay, edit permission. And let me log in with the other account. Okay, so I log into data flows with this account. Yep, save, okay, close, listen sources, data flows. Now this should list those workspaces that I have access to it. This is the one that I just loaded data in it. I'll expand that. I select that date table, and this would be a date table that I can use easily in my models. I don't even need to do any extra transformations. If I want to, I can, but I don't need to because it is already including everything that I want, right? So I can use this date table everywhere in my Power BI solutions easily. And this process can be done in for any other tables. Dataflow is not just for creating the data. Okay, so that was one example of Dataflow. Now let's go to the next part. The next thing I want to talk about is incremental load. Talking about enterprise usage of Power BI, incremental load is quite important because if we have like 1 million of rows, it's fine using Power BI just like that. But if we have a table with 100 million rows, you don't want to reload that data every time. If you have billions of rows, it will take like some hours to load the data. It's important to partition your data to just load that part of data that is let's say, changing. Let's say only your last years of data is changing, not all the years, right? So you can do some incremental load configuration. Now, incremental load right now is a premium feature in Power BI, but it is going to change, so it will be also available for Pro, hopefully, as well. The way that incremental works, I'll show you an example for that, is that you need to have a table with date field, of course. Incremental load right now working only on that scenario. So this is a table. It has a date field in it. As you can see, it has a number of date fields. Now, in edit queries, in Power Query, I have created two parameters, range start and range end. These two parameters are date time parameters. I'll go to manage parameters to show it to you. So range start is a date time parameter with a default value. Range end is a date time parameter with a default value. These names are reserved names. It should be exactly like this: range start, range end, exactly like that. No change in that. When I create such a parameter, then I go to my table. On one of these fields, in this case, I did a filtering on my I think order date field. I can remove it and do it again just one more time to see. So in my order date field, I can click on filtering and say date time filters. I want to filter everything that is between the start parameter and the end parameter. So this way, I'm bounding my table to be between those periods, right? Then you close and apply. This will give you the ability to come into Power BI, right-click on the table, and use this option called incremental refresh. So when I click on incremental refresh, I can see the configuration here. One thing about incremental refresh is that making sure that you use it on queries that are foldable. It also gives you that as a hint here that it's not recommended to use it on non-foldable queries. We won't have time to talk about what is foldable queries, what is non-foldable queries. I've written an article about that. You can read more about it. And I can turn off or on incremental refresh. So let's say I turn it on and I can say keep 20 years of data. This is how many years I want to keep. And let's say only refresh the last 1 year of data, right? So this way, let's say if my table is 20 million rows, almost like 1 million row per year, I'm not refreshing all of that. I'm only refreshing the last 1 million rows, which is quite helpful. You can also use some other options here, like detect data changes. That can be helpful because then it will capture only changes, or only refresh a complete year. Like if a year is not, sometimes you do like financial accounting things like that at a few days after the year finished. So this makes sure that even if you do it after that, it will just refresh it till end of the year. It will not bring those extra days in it. These are some additional options that are helpful. As you see, this little diamond icon beside incremental refresh means that it is right now a premium only feature. But there are some discussions to make it somehow available for pro users as well. I don't know exactly how, but this is going to be available. So talking about Power BI for enterprises, so far you have seen an ETL process, which can be possible even independent from Power BI report using Dataflow, storing that output into Azure Data Lake storage, and then doing incremental refresh. This incremental refresh is also possible in the Dataflow. So when I have tables in my Dataflow, I can actually do an incremental refresh on these. This is the icon for incremental refresh. I can select it, I can turn it on, I can choose a date field. Same process. I can say give me, let's say, or save the last 5 years and refresh only last 1 year, right? Obviously we won't do that for date table. It's a small table, but if you have a big table and you want to do incremental refresh, even in Dataflow process, you can do that, and it works exactly like what I explained in Power Query in Power BI Desktop. One other thing about Dataflow, which is quite important to talk about, is ability to see the lineage of queries. So here I have a lot of data flows, and some of these data flows might use a table coming from another data flow, and they have some interrelation between each other. There is a lineage view here, or diagram view, that actually shows me that these data flows are getting data from each other, right? Let's see, how can I fit this in a window? Something like this, okay? So for example, I have a data flow here, reads the data from O data source, another data flow, read data from SQL Server, another one, read data from CSV. The one that read data from SQL Server, there are two other data flows using that, and I can see the link between these data flows. I can click on it and it shows me that what field actually used between this data flow and that data flow. So lineage of all of these. So actually everything that you need in an enterprise implementation of an ETL is considered to be available here. Okay, so that was incremental load. The next part, composite model. When we talk about enterprise usage of Power BI, another challenge is that the size of data is huge. And when the size of data is huge, we cannot usually import data. So using Power BI, you can import data, or you can use DirectQuery connection. If we use import data, we get the fastest performance in Power BI because everything is in memory, everything is super fast. If we use DirectQuery, then we have the ability to work with large models, even terabytes, petabytes of data. The data is always fresh, but then we won't have that performance because it's like huge data source. Every time you are sending the query, so you are losing the query performance. The data is not in memory, right? So import versus direct query is always a challenge. When you have huge data, when you are working with big data, your only option is direct query, right? And imagine we have a table like this. We have a report, Power BI report like this. So this Power BI report has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 visuals in this Power BI report. It means that if I use direct query, it will send 6 queries every single time to the data source. Every time I click on a slicer, every time I click on a column chart, every time it will send 6 queries to the data source. It will make it really slow, right? So what composite model is doing is that composite model is saying that you can get combination of these in one model. You can have import and direct query. When you have import and direct query, you will have query performance, you will have the freshness of data, and you will have huge models all in one place. How that is possible? Let's say you have a number of tables in your model. Previously, you had them all either import or you had them all direct query. Now you can combine them. You can say some of these tables are import, those tables that are small, like date table is import, product is import, employee is import, geography is import. But some tables are big. Sales is big, reseller sales is big, customer is still, let's say, big. Keep those as direct query. That means composite model. It gives you the ability to combine things with each other. Again, just to show you an example, I'll open Power BI Desktop. I start with a direct query connection, and then I show you how we can add a new table to that. The direct query connection that I use is not a big SQL Server database table. It's a small one, but I will use it as a direct query, and then I will get another part of that data coming from Excel to show you that it's possible to combine data. So I'll start with getting data from SQL Server, and I choose direct query, let's say to my local server. And then from the list of databases, I'll select, let's say, one table here. Let's say my fact table, I get it from direct query, fact internet sales table, load. It is DirectQuery, so it means that it will not actually load data into Power BI. It just brings the metadata, means column names, the table, and table names, everything like a structure, the metadata, not in the left-hand side, that there is no data tab, relationship tab, report tab. In the bottom section here, it tells me that the storage mode of this is DirectQuery, right? So data is not stored here. Every time I bring something, it is just querying the data source for that. So every time I bring this, this will send a query to database. You see, it's a little bit slower because it is. Okay, I can now go and get data from an Excel data source also. And as a sample, let's say I select an Excel version of that data source. And I get part of this from that Excel one, like product, load. This one would be imported. The other one would be DirectQuery, right? As soon as I start doing this, it tells me that it's a potential security risk because you are combining a DirectQuery source with import data. Just click OK. And then it will change my storage mode from DirectQuery mode to mixed mode, or what we call composite mode, right? Now in this mode, I have one table, which is DirectQuery. This table is DirectQuery. I can actually see that in the storage mode information for that. And the other table, the product, is import data. Easier to see it here. So that's import data, right? So I can have import data and DirectQuery. When I'm querying big tables, it will be slower. When I'm querying smaller tables, it would be faster, right? That composite model still can be even much better when we combine it with aggregation, which is the next part of this explanation. Now, to show you how the aggregation works, first I show you a video recorded demo of the aggregation, then I'll show you how this is possible to be done. So this is a recorded video of a sample data set, which is 1 trillion rows of data. As you can see, it's just like Power BI, drag and drop. We drag 1 trillion of rows of data over there. We slice and dice it by date, by a few other fields. It's just like drag and drop. You don't even notice that you are working with 1 trillion rows of data in this example. You can change visualizations easily. You can bring other fields, right click on it, drill through to another page. Everything is just super fast. You never notice that you are working on a model that is using DirectQuery and also is working with trillion rows of data. It's super fast, just like that, right? Now, how this is possible? This is possible with the power of aggregation. So let me explain what aggregation is. Aggregation, so consider a model like this. Let's say we have a data model like this, a fact table, and some dimension tables around, right? Let's say this fact table is our huge table. Let's say this is 1 trillion rows of data, and these are all different kind of dimensions. Now, also imagine a report like this that we are producing from such a model, right? Now, in this report, are we always looking at every single transaction in that fact table? No, because these are aggregating data by different things. Like this is just the total of order quantity. This is just the total of sales amount. Or let's look at this, for example. This is sales amount by every year, right? To produce such an output, I just need a table with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. For every year, 1 row, and then the value of sales amount as a column, right? So this can be a table with 5 rows, not 1 trillion rows, right? So aggregation is exactly doing the same thing. It tells you that you can pre-build your aggregation, and if you pre-build your aggregation, let's say your big table is here, hundreds of millions of rows is here, But in the memory storage of Power BI, you build an aggregated table. When you see a visual like this visual will get the output from the aggregated table. It will not get data from that actual transaction table, because this can be answered by the aggregated table. Now, if it is something that cannot be answered by the aggregated table, it will query the data source, right? But most of the time, it can be, right? So how this process works, again, there are lots of details. I'll just go through showing you that as an example. So here I have, let me close this incremental load as well. I have a Power BI desktop file here. This Power BI desktop model has exactly the same model that I showed you as that picture. Fact internet sales is my big table. It is a direct query source. As you can see, it is a direct query source. I have a number of dimensions. I have also created an aggregated table. Now, what is this aggregated table? How did I create it? In Power Query, I used group by to create it. This aggregated table can be created in anywhere. You can use T-SQL group by to do that. Here, I used the group by function in Power Query to do that. This group by. So I created this from that. It was like a reference from that, and I did some group bys on it. And these are my group by configuration, actually. Comes up in a second. Yeah. So I grouped it by three fields and then did some aggregations on it, right? You can do this grouping everywhere, even in DAX with calculated tables, right? So I created that table, aggregated table, which is much smaller than that table. So if we consider that this table, fact table, is 100 million rows, this is probably like 10,000 rows, right? So this table is a small table, can be imported. That table is a big table, cannot be imported. Also in between, that depends on are they connected to which table. Their storage mode would be defined based on that. So something like this, that is a view of my model. So red tables are direct query tables. This green one is import, the one that I created as aggregated, and the others are tables that are connected to both. They need to have a specific type of storage mode called dual, because sometimes they have to act as import, sometimes they have to act as a direct query. Now, how can I make sure that this process works fine? I hide this table, so user will never see this table. When I look at this, report developer has no idea that there's an aggregated table behind the scene, right? But when they start slicing and dicing, just to show you that this is not sending query to SQL Server, I run SQL Profiler, which can catch queries sent to the SQL Server. So this is SQL Profiler. If there is any queries sent to the SQL Server, I should see it, right? And then I go to this model, just showing you again, fact internet sales is a direct query table. Now I start by slicing and dicing data. I'll bring sales amount here. In a visual, it just shows instantly no query sent to the data source. I go and slice and dice that by, let's say, calendar year. Still no query sent to the data source. I bring customer, let's say, gender as a legend here. Still no query sent to the data source, because considering this model, I'm still dealing with my import data, date and customer. These are things that can work with my aggregated table. But now let's say I bring something which is not import, promotion. Let's say I start slicing and dicing that data by promotion, right? So I'll remove one of these. And from my promotion dimension, I bring a field here. As soon as I bring this here, then I see the query sent to the data source, right? So this is switching now to the direct query. I have a model that can switch to direct query if needed. If not needed, it will use the import, right? So let me bring that back again. From user point of view, they will never notice it because they will not see this at all. They will just use the fact internet sales. They start slicing and dicing by different, let's say, dimensions. Some of those dimensions which are smaller will cause import data, fast response. Some of those that are bigger will cause direct query, right? Can you have multiple layers of aggregation? Of course you can. So I have, let's say, a visual like this, sales by gender, and that can be responded by this aggregated table. But I have another visual which has promotion in it. Promotion cannot be answered by this aggregation, so I create another aggregation. And in this aggregation, I have also promotion in it. This aggregated table is bigger than that aggregated table. Let's say if my fact table is 200 million rows, and that aggregated table is 10,000 rows, this aggregated table might be, let's say, 1 million rows, right? But still much smaller than that. So bigger than that, smaller than the actual fact table, right? I can have another level of aggregation like this. So this query will hit that aggregation. And if there is a query that doesn't have that field in any of aggregated tables, like let's say product, then it will query that from the data source. That example that you have seen, that trillion rows of data that you have seen as an example, that was using 7 aggregated tables on all different levels, on the date level, on let's say customer and not customer, but driver level, because this is driver's information, I think, of New York City. Driver information, their distance traveled, all of these has been different levels of aggregation. There is no limitation how many levels of aggregation you can create, but at the end of the day, it will give you such a fast model. So you work with big data, you never actually realize that this is working with trillions of rows, all of that with power of composite model and aggregation. Okay, now let's talk about the last one, and then I wrap it up. We'll go through some questions. So the last option, which is quite good for usage of Power BI in enterprise, is called XMLA Endpoint. You probably heard about XMLA if you used analysis services before. XMLA is the way that we connect to an analysis services engine. Power BI models are analysis services behind the scene, but so far we didn't have the access to that analysis services engine. There was no way to access it. And now that endpoint became available. That was, I think, about like a week ago, they made this available. What that means? That means now you can connect to your Power BI data sets from any tools like SQL Server Management Studio, like SQL Server data tools, or even third-party tools like DAX Studio, Power BI Helper. These tools can connect to that, and you can start managing your model. You don't actually really need to do everything from Power BI Desktop or go to the website and do everything from there. Now your Power BI data set is accessible through the website, of course. It is also accessible through other third-party tools. It is accessible through SQL Server Management Studio, DAX Studio, all other tools. You can even have other visualization tools. Let's say in an organization, people love to use Tableau. They use Tableau as a data source. They connect to a Power BI dataset. With XMLA endpoint, they can do that. Or let's say you run your Power BI dataset for a long time. Now you want to see how was the usage of that, how long each query took. You want to do some performance tuning to see those queries that are smaller. Let's do something about that. Let's say, for example, create an aggregation with that. You can use Management Studio, connect to that, run some DMVs, data management views, like this is an example. From Management Studio, connected to Power BI, you see this is the URL connected in Power BI. And you can call some DMVs, data management views. It will give you information about your model. You can control all of these. It is available premium only at the moment. I'm not sure this is going to be available for Pro as well or not, but at the moment it's a premium only feature. At the moment it can only read from the model. You cannot write into the model. Like, for example, I cannot make a change in this table from this environment. Right now, if I want to make a change, old method, do it in Power BI Desktop, publish it. After a few months, the XMLA endpoint read and write would be available. In that point, then you can even make changes from here. You can control almost everything from here, add row-level security configuration from here, look at your, let's say, incremental refresh configuration from here, set almost everything from here. So you will have much better management on your model, which is published in the website. For this one, I'm not going to show you a demo because it needs a specific premium configuration and things like that, but this is the experience that you will get. Okay, so a summary of what I talked about. I talked about Dataflow, ETL solution when you use Power BI in an enterprise environment. Composite model, when we are dealing with big data, you need to bring some parts of data, import it. Smaller tables, those that are huge, keep it as DirectQuery. With the power of aggregation, you create levels of aggregated tables as imported tables. And then that will give you fast access to the model, so your model will not be slow. Incremental load will give you the ability to not load the entire data, only load delta, only load changes. And XMLA endpoint at the end will give you the ability to manage your model, control your model from any third-party tools, or even Microsoft tools like Management Studio and SQL Server Data Tools. If you are interested to learn more about architecture of Power BI, this is a book that I've written recently. You can get it from this link. Examples that I mentioned to you, I've written blog post articles about this, like series of Dataflow, so you can read them all. These slides, I will send it to Pass and they will share it with you. Series of composite model, it has exactly a step-by-step explanation of how to build your aggregated table, how to set up your aggregated table, how to test it, how to add multi-levels of aggregation. This QR code and this link will get you to the Power BI Rocket to Rockstar book, which is available free, and you can just download it. Okay, Jazz, so that was pretty much everything on my side. Do we have any questions?
Hi, Reza. We have quite a few questions here. So I'll just start in the same order that they came in. So the first question is Dataflow or shared data sets for sharing across workspaces? The individual is asking if the Dataflow requires premium to link across workspaces.
No, you can use Dataflow even with Pro. It works across different workspaces. So for all of these, you don't need premium, but there are some functionalities that need premium, like creating computed entity, which is an entity referenced from another entity while the other entity is also loaded in Azure Data Lake, or creating a linked entity, another entity that comes from another data flow. So if you do things like those, because they need extra computed power, those need Power BI Premium, but just having a data flow on a workspace that you can access it even from other workspaces, you can do that with even Pro.
All right. That's perfect. And the next question is, can I use Dataflow to grab data from a visual, i.e. a table in another Power BI file published in the workspace?
Sorry, can you repeat again?
Sure. So can I use Dataflow to grab data from a visual, such as a table in another Power BI file published in a workspace or in the workspace?
Getting data from a visual, I don't exactly understand it. Maybe it means that showing data on a visual, that the data is coming from a data flow in another workspace. If that is the question, yes, because you can get data from data flow no matter which workspace it is. As long as you have access to that workspace, you can get data from that data flow. And when you get data from that data flow, you can show it in any visuals, of course.
All right. And then the next question we have is asking, what is the difference between SSIS, ADF, and Dataflow?
That's quite a tricky question. So SSIS is, let's say, the ETL technology that we used for a long time, let's say on-premises ETL solution, not for Power BI, for actually all, let's say, data transformations requirement. And it is still out there. You can use it. SSIS recently have one source added to it called Power Query source. So you can have Power Query scripts in it and run it on a scheduled basis. So SSIS is not a cloud-based technology. you can run it on premises. Now, Azure Data Factory came to help that for making that cloud-based. So Azure Data Factory is now cloud-based version of running SSIS, because you can upload your SSIS, let's say, packages up to Azure Data Factory and run it and store the data output somewhere else, right? Now, comparing Azure Data Factory with Microsoft Dataflow in Power BI, I would say there are lots of similarities because they are both cloud-based, they are both ETL technologies. However, there are some differences. Dataflow is designed mainly just for Power BI. So the output would go to Azure Data Lake that you can use only in Power BI at this stage. But Azure Data Factory, you can export it everywhere you like. Dataflow have a much better, let's say, data transformation experience. It's like ETL itself. So you have seen it, which was like really good experience of clicking on something and let's say making some changes in that really easily with simple, let's say, edit query, right? We don't have that experience, that really easy experience to do in Azure Data Factory, right? On the other hand side, Azure Data Factory is good to work with big data because you can run a Spark cluster and you can spread your load into multiple clusters. So there are some pros and cons. I would say if we are dealing with big data, maybe still Azure Data Factory give us some more options. If we are working with let's say more transformation options, then probably Dataflow is giving us more transformation power using these options up here.
All right, thank you. So the next question I have here is, can I call a Power BI report in my .NET applications?
I think by that, it means that can I show that Power BI report in my .NET application? Yes, you can. It's called Power BI Embedded. You can embed a Power BI report in a web application. You need to go through an authentication process, authorization process, get a token. So your application needs to do that. I've written like 7 blog posts about how to do that, the code itself, the C# code, ASP.NET MVC application, how all of that works. You have to work with REST API, but the short answer, yes, possible.
All right, thank you. And okay, the following question is, can I create partition and drop partitions?
That's a very good question. So partitioning is something that we had in analysis services, and still we have it in analysis services. In Power BI, partitioning is slightly different. So right now, when we do incremental load, kind of we are creating partitions, but we don't actually see that partition. So that XMLA endpoint give us this option. With XMLA endpoint, we can actually see partitions. And then later on, when it become available as a XMLA endpoint read and write, then you can even drop partitions, you can even recreate partitions, all of those would be available. But you need to wait for that XMLA read and write for a few months.
All right, thank you. And the following question is similar to one you had previously. It's just, can a data flow be used from multiple workspaces?
Yeah, so similar to
yeah. And then the following one after that is, hang on, I believe you got this one as well, is what is the difference between SSIS? We went through that one as well.
Yeah.
And then I believe the final question we have here right now is, using Power BI, can I replace SSIS, SSAS, and SSRS?
Again, another tricky question. So if you asked me this like about 5 years ago, no, that answer was no that time. If you ask me today, I would say yes, definitely. Because right now we have even features that you cannot even produce such thing in the traditional BI system technologies. Power BI is not just a fancy tool to just drag and drop, build a chart. Power BI is super powerful tool. You've seen aggregation features today, you've seen data flows. These are things that build over time, and these are things that some of them we don't have it available in the traditional way. So moving forward, I would say Power BI, especially the Power BI premium experience, would be the most premium BI experience in the Microsoft technologies. This is my feeling.
All right. And we have one more that came in. It's just a follow-up to the very initial question about the Dataflow or shared data set for sharing across workspaces. That Dataflow requires premium, so there's a bit more context that's provided. It's just asking if linked Dataflow requires premium, and an example from example shown, one Dataflow reference and another Dataflow.
Yeah, so that example, that lineage that I showed,
Yeah.
so let me just show it one more time and cancel this. So this lineage that you have seen here, this is an example that I need premium definitely for that, because this data flow is reading from this data flow, right? So when you reference another data flow, yeah, this definitely need premium. But if my data flow is just like this, or this first level, and I'm using Power BI Desktop to get data from that data flow, no, for that I don't need premium.
All right, that's perfect. That answers all the questions we have at this time, Reza.
Okay, great. Thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for joining.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining us today. And if you stay tuned for the next session, which is Azure SQL Database Lessons Learned from the Trenches with Jose Eduardo Diaz. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.